So here's our example. X squared plus 16x plus 5 equals 0. I want you to notice that our middle coefficient is even. 16 is even. So this tells me that we're allowed to divide both sides of the equation by 2. That's what the trick tells us. So if that's how we use the trick, that turns our equation into 1/2 x squared plus 8x plus 5/2 equals 0. Now again, this looks ugly now, but it's really not bad. So we want to be able to use the quadratic formula, which means our a value is 1/2, our b value is 8, and our c value is 5/2. What we're plugging into, remember, is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's plug in this a value of 1/2, b value of 8, c value of 5/2 into this formula here. So the opposite of 8 is -8. We have plus minus. We have the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1/2 times 5/2 all over 2 times 1/2. This looks ugly. We have fractions within fractions. But let's check out what's actually going on here. What's 2 times 2? It's 4. If I have a 4 in the bottom and a 4 in the top, those things divide out. How about in the bottom? I have a 2 in the bottom and a 2 in the top. Those things divide out. So what am I actually left with in this problem? -8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 5. The 4 divided out with the 4 that was in the bottom, and I had 1 times 5. In the very bottom, the 2 times 1/2 is 1, so we don't need to even write over 1. All I have left now is to say 64 minus 5 is 59. There's my answer. Nice and simple. Let's go back up to the original problem. Excuse me. And let's look at not using the trick. Let's look at if I just had x squared plus 16x plus 5 equals 0, and I didn't divide both sides by 2. My a value would be 1, my b value would be 16, and my c value would be 5. I would still be plugging into the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now my suggestion to you, back to the fact that you need to memorize that, write it every problem. And try to write it from memory, but write it every problem. So we have the opposite of 16 plus or minus the square root of 16 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5 all over 2 times 1. So one of the first things that you're probably going to notice about this variation of the problem is our numbers are going to get big. 16 squared is 256 minus 20 over 2, or -16 plus or minus the square root of 236 over 2. Now at this point, this is where we should have been done if we used the trick. This is how many steps we should have taken. So all the work we do beyond this are steps that we saved by doing the trick. So what should we do next? We should actually simplify the square root of 236 using the whole break it up, take the radical, clean it up. And as everybody knows, 236 is 4 times 59. Now, obviously, I jest. That's the first thing that we got to notice is, oh my gosh, this simplifying of the radical is not trivial. So that would have been some work probably to figure that out. I happen to know that. Now the square root of 4 is 2, and then 59. Now we have to simplify this fraction. In order to do so, we need to realize that I could factor a 2 out of the top. And in doing so, my 2's will divide out in the top and the bottom. And I do end up with the same answer as we got using the trick. Obviously, using the trick was a whole lot easier. Use the trick, because the chance of you making an error in these steps that we saved are really high. I see a lot of people that simplify the radical incorrectly, or they simplify the fraction incorrectly. So you may as well just use the trick from the beginning and deal smaller numbers throughout the entire problem. Seems like a win-win there. You're skipping steps and dealing with smaller numbers. Pretty good idea to use the trick.